One Piece, Blood in the Shallows, an alternative timeline fanfiction, written by Tim Sonski, narrated by Jose Kage. As the world government struggles to recover from the decimation of Eni's lobby, the once obscure pirate gang known as the Straw Hats have been catapulted into infamy for dealing the Navy such a crippling blow, while some of the lawless now view Monkey D. Luffy and his crew with a new sense of awe and well-deserved respect. Most others began to reevaluate their merit upon the Grand Line and sharpen their blades, ready to act as the balance of power shifts. As the crew departs Water 7, reunited again after Robin's kidnapping, another pirate enterprise seeks to continue the carnage and surpass the Straw Hats in infamy by spilling more blood before the Navy has a chance to recover. Part 1. Marion. Standing beside the foremast of the sleek black ship, the lean woman tossed her plum-colored bangs from her eyes as a glimmer of light pricked the dark horizon, where gray sky met black sea. And there it is. She grinned triumphantly, her warm breath clouding the cold night air in front of her. She pulled her wide-brimmed cavalier hat down low over her forehead, its felt brim sporting a curved silver blade instead of a traditional ostrich plume. In silhouette, it gave her shadow the appearance of having a shark's fin upon her brow, and the foreboding metaphor was not lost on her. From the crow's nest above her, a hooded figure leapt down to the deck beside her, landing nimbly like a bird on a perch. Impossible to find by day, difficult to locate at night, but wait until twilight, and it will willingly beckon you forth. Her eyes glimmered as she spoke, like she was remembering long-lost poetry. The twin rapiers sheathed across her belt wrapped together softly as she turned and walked towards the small boat waiting to be launched on the port side. "How many guards?" the hooded figure asked before following in her wake. "Not enough," the blade master replied. "Lady Rook!" a voice called to her from the quarterdeck. "The flares are set to launch at your signal." Should only need one," she replied as she stepped into the transport boat. "Be ready to weigh anchor as soon as it gets wet. The bishop and I won't be gone long." The hooded figure stepped into the boat after her, as silent as snowfall. "Oh," Lady Rook called back to the crew. "Have the sea stone cuffs ready, just in case." The boat descended into the choppy feral waters of the Grand Line. The two Marines on guard duty by the short pier noticed the boat by the glow of the lighthouse behind them. Stationed on what was barely a spit of rock in the middle of the open ocean, they knew there was absolutely no reason for anyone to dock at the island, unless there was a monthly shift rotation. They had been posted there less than a week. They raised their rifles and trained them at the approaching boat. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat sat casually within the vessel, one leg resting over the other, and blew both men a sly kiss. "Who's there? Identify yourself." "I'm the last face you'll ever see," she said cheerfully. With the force of a tidal wave crashing against the rocks, both men were catapulted with tremendous force across the sea, skipping like pebbles across the surface before the cold darkness swallowed them up. "Well done, Bishop," Lady Rook applauded as she stepped out of the boat and placed her polished boot upon the dock. The hooded figure materialized out of the shadows to her left. From somewhere atop the lighthouse there came a single gunshot, but it wasn't aimed at them. It was a warning, summoning the remaining men at arms to the pier. "Now here's a proper reception." The woman smirked as 12 Marines rushed down the dock from the lighthouse entryway. The hooded figure vanished stealthily into the night, and Lady Rook drew both her rapiers from her belt and spread her arms wide, planting her feet and standing with both blades pointing to either side, causing her long shadow to cast itself back across the water like a crucifix. At that signal, a blood-red flare shot upwards from her ship, anchored out upon the sea, and a second shadow birthed itself in front of her, cast by the crimson light. All 12 men cried out in agony, as in a flash they were all cut down with a storm of furious strikes, and blood rained down upon the wet wood of the pier. Lady Rook replaced her swords in their sheaths. She hadn't moved a muscle, yet all her enemies now lay in a mutilated heap before her. From atop the lighthouse, she heard an anguished cry as the lone marine up top was hurled down upon the rocks below by the bishop. "Meet you in the foyer," Lady Rook called out to her accomplice as she stepped over the bodies and made her way up the steps to the lighthouse entrance. Once inside, she scanned the room and took a quick inventory of the numerous wanted posters mounted like family photos along the walls. The bishop gracefully leapt down from the balcony above to land by her side. "Not here, either," she said with a disgruntled sigh. "Still being upstaged by this tripe." She gestured at the pictures of Captain Cavendish, Flower Sword Vista, and Roranoa Zorro. She swiped at the latter's poster with the curved silver knife she kept in her hat brim, and the straw hat pirate's face drifted to the floor lazily in several pieces. "Clearly I haven't killed the right people yet," she mused. She replaced the knife upon her hat brim and started tapping the stones with her boots delicately as she wandered across the room. When her heel made a soft metal echoing sound against the stones, she pointed down beneath her. "Here." The bishop jumped into the air and brought a solid foot down with the force of a cannon blast, right upon the spot Lady Rook had just been standing. The floor gave way and both intruders plummeted downwards into the abyss for a few blind seconds before they alighted safely upon their feet on hard-packed earth. "Who's there?" A deep, haggard voice came from the darkness just ahead of them. Lady Rook struck a match, and the voice hissed in anguish. "I have not seen light in so long," it croaked as if choking on sharp stones. There came the sound of dusty chains rattling as the mysterious creature shifted its weight. Lady Rook raised the match and for the first time noticed the stone walls surrounding them. There were dozens of short spears protruding from them that had been driven deep into the rock face at every angle. "No," she thought as she raised the match higher. "Not dozens." The shadows crisscrossed themselves in an endless spiderweb pattern as she took in the harrowing sight. Several dozen, perhaps hundreds. She kicked at a fallen blunted spear as the match flickered out, and noticed that the weapon felt harder than steel and twice as heavy. "How long has it been since you tasted sea air?" she asked as she struck another match. The chains rattled. "How long has Goldie Roger been dead?" the voice replied. It had been an elegant voice once, Lady Rook could tell, refined and luscious, but time lost in the darkness had filed it down to a jagged, hostile rasp. "Long enough for the lances that speared him to have grown brittle. I feel this is a superfluous request, but can you prove you are who we think you are?" Lady Rook raised an eyebrow. There was a short pause. "Stand back," the captive commanded, and there came a clamor of rapidly moving chains before a javelin launched itself from the darkness to spear a slab of rock directly between the two rescuers. Lady Rook clapped. "Bishop, I present to you Juzo Ramses, eater of the Quill devil fruit." The woman drew her rapiers and twirled them with idle finesse. "Before a young Dracul Mihawk got him, and the Marines imprisoned him here, he was briefly one of the greatest terrors of the Grand Line." "I've never heard of him before," the bishop replied simply. "There's a good reason for that," Lady Rook replied as she took a step closer towards the bound figure and bent forward to look him in the eye. "I don't expect you've ever heard of the chess piece pirates?" she asked. The captive grunted a non-committal sound. "In exchange for your service, we're offering you your freedom and a position amongst our crew." The captive stood slowly with a rattle of chains, and from the shadows Lady Rook detected the first traces of a hopeful glint in the man's fiery red eyes. "Free me, and I will spear your enemies together and stain the soil with their blood." Lady Rook slashed at the chains with her swords, and the harsh metal shattered like glass and fell in defeated fragments upon the ground. "Welcome aboard. How would you feel about being referred to as Knight? Sanji! Where's the meat? The lanky blonde chef sighed as he casually flicked his hair out of his eyes and sprinkled garnish upon the fish he was preparing over the stove. He knows I'm cooking fish. He knows because all he brings me to cook is fish. He knows the only thing he's going to catch out here is fish. Why is he asking me about meat? He grumbled out loud to the tiny reindeer in the large red top hat that sat at the far end of the table, referring to their belligerent and constantly starving adolescent captain.
I think he dreamed we had meat and has forgotten he's awake.
The reindeer known as Chopper replied simply as he flipped through the large medical text on the table in front of him with his cloven hooves. Sanji! Meat! Captain Monkey D. Luffy's persistent screeching came again from outside on deck. Sanji ignored him and flipped the tender piece of sea bass over in the skillet and doused it with a splash of white wine. Nami's piece, he cooed and did a quick twirl on his toes. Robin prefers red wine with her fish. How untraditional and exotic! He beamed as he balanced the girl's plates in either hand and set them on the table.
What do the others like?
Chopper raised an eyebrow. Who cares? Sanji huffed. They'll eat what I give them. He pulled a cigarette out from behind his ear and lit it with a quick flourish of his silver lighter, and turned to face the porthole as he exhaled the smoke blossom away from the food. Nami enjoyed the last dish so much she asked for seconds. Sanji nearly swooned, remembering the look of satisfaction on their navigator's gorgeous face. He straightened his tie and adjusted his suit jacket before turning back to face Chopper. I hope she asked for dessert today. I've got something... He trailed off. Leaning against the dining room table, a delicate hand inches away from the plate he had just set down, was a slim, tanned woman with long emerald green hair. A small silver anchor charm hung from the end of her ponytail like a tassel, and her navy blue sundress and thigh-high boots almost seemed to shine with a wondrous hue of their own. Her golden brown eyes locked with Sanji's, and she idly plucked the smoke from his mouth. Those are bad for you. She winked as she placed it to her own ruby lips and inhaled. Even the way the smoke escaped from between her ivory teeth was sensual. Everything about her was radiant. Sanji scowled, thoroughly unimpressed. Give me that. He took the cigarette back.
What's that?
Chopper looked up. His eyes expanded to the size of watermelons, and suddenly he was shrieking, his tiny cloven hoofs high in the air.
Wah! Who is she? How did she get in here?
His head started jerking back and forth furiously, examining the galley for any signs of a hidden compartment she may have just emerged from. Have you missed me? She smirked. Move. Sanji pointed to the dish by her hand. That's Nami's spot. The young woman leaned forward towards him and away from the table. Who's Nami? She raised an eyebrow. How did you find me? Sanji ignored her question.
Help! Luffy!
Chopper wailed from behind them, hiding behind his chair awkwardly with most of his body out in the open. Ugh, that beaver thing is noisy. Can we talk somewhere else? The woman tipped her head in Chopper's direction. Not too far, Sanji shrugged. I need to finish cooking for my crew.
Zoro! Robin! Usopp! She's kidnapping Sanji!
Chopper sprinted out of the galley with his arms flailing wildly, and his eyes bugging out and nearly collided with Nami as she climbed the steps from the outer deck. Hey! Easy, Chopper! What's with all the screaming? She exclaimed as she bent forward, attempting to calm the reindeer. From the deck below, Luffy and Usopp, who had been arguing over whose turn it was to sit in the mast's shadow as they fished, abruptly stopped and glanced upwards towards the commotion. Hey, Chopper! Is dinner ready? Luffy's stomach roared.
She kidnapped Sanji! The green-haired woman! She called me a beaver!
What? What green-haired woman? Nami started. Is there someone else on board? Chopper ducked behind Nami and planted his hooves into her lower back, shoving her forcefully into the galley so fast she nearly pitched forward onto the floor. There was no one there. What? Chopper's jaw hit the floor. Sanji? Quit scaring our reindeer! She paused as she glanced at the oven, and suddenly her stomach dropped. For as long as Sanji had been with the crew, she had never once known him to leave the room while the burners were still on. The smallest of fires on a pirate ship could lead to the ruin of them all. She walked forward and shut off the stove. "Sanji?" She tried calling him again. Nami wasn't used to him not immediately appearing by her side, all adoring smiles and eager to please when she summoned him. Luffy launched himself through the door to the galley like a ballistic rubber frog.
"Let's eat!"
he cheered.
"Where'd they go? She took Sanji!"
Chopper howled. "Who was here, Chopper?" Nami asked, squatting down to look their tiny ship's physician in the eye. "Who was the green-haired woman?"
"She appeared out of nowhere!"
Chopper waved his tiny arms frantically.
"And Sanji knew her! He didn't even go, duh!"
Chopper made his eyes bug out in lustful affection and mimicked Sanji's slack-jawed hypnotized look Nami was more than familiar with. Wait, there was a strange, beautiful woman here, in this room, and he didn't start pining and drooling? Nami stared at Chopper in agitated confusion, running her fingers through her orange hair in alarm as Usopp and Robin entered the galley. Chopper furiously shook his head back and forth so hard his hat nearly flew off. "What is it?" Robin asked, noticing the look on her face. "Someone's on the ship, and Sanji may be in trouble." Nami stood up straight. "Usopp, go wake up Zoro. We've got to search the ship." Nami, Robin, Usopp, and Chopper double-timed it out of the galley as Luffy continued to stuff his face. "Hey Sanji, this is great!" he beamed. Sanji stood on the bow of a strange ship surrounded by 6 pirates, 3 marines, and his captor, the exquisite green-haired beauty known as Marion Colfax. Each of the pirates had a green scarf draped around their necks, and the marines stood at attention by the mast, each stone-faced and quiet. "What is going on?" Sanji exclaimed. "I transported us," Marion replied simply as she let go of his forearm. "I'm aware of that," Sanji snapped. Long before he had known her, Marion had taken a single bite from a devil fruit as a child before the melon had been knocked from her hand by her horrified mother and had fallen into the sea. While the power level of a devil fruit eater tended to thrive when at a distance from water, Marion's power excelled the closer she was to it. Seawater, at least. As long as the saltwater air was in her lungs, she could transport herself with ease from one ship to another as simply as snapping her fingers. With enough concentration, she could transport others a short distance along with her if she physically made contact with them. Back at the floating restaurant, Baratier, in the East Blue, she had often used her ability to sneak aboard the ship after hours, where Sanji would delight in cooking private meals for her, which they would share via candlelight. He had often wondered what the extent of her powers could have been if she had eaten the entire devil fruit. "Where are we?" Sanji asked, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Why are there marines aboard a pirate ship?" Marion held her hand out towards her men. "Spyglass." One of the green-scarfed pirates handed her a telescope, and she in turn passed it to him. She pointed out towards the horizon. "There's your ship," she reassured him. Sanji raised the spyglass up to his eye to verify. Sure enough, he could see Zoro passed out asleep up in the crow's nest, while Usopp furiously poked at him, attempting to wake him up. "We've been following in your wake for over an hour," Marion said. "The whole while he's been asleep. Honestly, a rock with painted-on eyes would make a better lookout." Sanji lowered the telescope. "Ugh, mosshead," he glowered.
"Sanji!"
A second voice came from behind him, and he turned as he heard approaching footsteps coming from across the deck. A young woman with short dark hair and glasses, sporting a pristine marine uniform, came forward, her katana fastened firmly at her side. "Do you remember me? I'm Tashigi!" Sanji exclaimed with wild excitement as both his hands flew up to his heart and he nearly glided over to her, immediately going down on one knee before her. "How could I forget you, oh noble angel of the high seas? You remembered me. Oh, how I love you so, sweet cherub," he nearly sang. Marion sighed. "Ah, there's the Sanji I remember." Tashigi pursed her lips and gave him a cold look.
"Sanji, I'm a naval officer, and you're a member of one of the most notorious pirate gangs on the Grand Line with a bounty on your head of over 70 million berries. Now's not a great time for charm. Stand up. We need to talk."
Recognizing the urgency in her voice, Sanji reluctantly conceded and stood. He relit his dying cigarette. "You have my full attention."
You asked why a handful of Marines are standing aboard a pirate ship and no one is cuffed or bleeding?
Tashigi asked. I had wondered, yeah, Sanji nodded. The Black Clover pirates are temporarily allying themselves with a handful of Marines for our mutual protection. Marion gestured to her group. We're in over our heads, though. We need your help. Black Clover pirates? Sanji asked. Marion and each of the green-scarfed men folded their left ear forward to reveal a hidden clover tattooed on the side of their heads. Never heard of you, Sanji shrugged. It doesn't matter. There aren't many of us left, Marion replied and folded her arms. Not long ago, we had a small armada of 8 ships across the Grand Line. Most of them are at the bottom of the sea now. Their entire crews with them. Tashigi unrolled a parchment and handed it to Sanji.
This is from 20 years ago. Have you ever heard of Juzo Ramses?
Sanji flicked the ash from his cigarette and examined the wanted poster. The face of the man staring back at him was horrific. Under what seemed like more than a dozen scars crisscrossing across his face, the sunken cheeks and crooked fangs made him appear more mutant than human. The eyes were barely 2 specks of red hidden underneath a massive brow. The skin was the color of sandpaper and looked twice as rough. From under the massive, Amish-style wide-brimmed hat hung hardened black narrow shards of what he suspected was hair. What happened to this guy? Sanji asked as he handed the poster back to the Marine.
A lot, she replied. 2 weeks ago, he was broken out of his secret prison by the chess piece pirates. Together, they've been destroying every Navy ship that stands in their way as they hunt down the Black Clover pirates.
Why them? An old grudge, Marion replied. He has devil fruit abilities. His body produces razor-sharp quills the length of my arm that he can launch with deadly speed and accuracy. His skin is all but completely impenetrable, and though you can't tell by looking at the picture. He's about 8 feet tall. Sanji tossed his hair. So, what has this got to do with me or my crew? In fact, why couldn't Tashigi have just asked to board our ship and address all of us together? Marion crossed her arms. I don't know the other Straw Hats, and I don't trust them. But I do trust the man who fed me all those years ago when I was starving. Sanji gritted his teeth, nearly causing the cigarette to break in 2. And how did you repay me? By betraying me. Marion stared back without blinking, her face expressionless except for a hint of sorrow in the corner of her eyes. Sanji turned to Tashigi. Seriously, why involve the Straw Hats at all? The Navy must have the strength to capture this guy alone. Tashigi sighed.
It's more complicated than that. Most of the Navy and the world government think Ramses is dead. If word spread, not only that he has been alive this whole time, but he is also roaming free, there would be chaos and mutiny amongst the ranks.
Okay, say we were actually willing to help, Sanji tried. If this Ramses guy has devil fruit powers, then Luffy is the one you want. You were there when he defeated Crocodile, single-handedly. Tashigi shook her head and adjusted her glasses.
Singling you out was our last resort. Smoker took a huge risk sending me with Marion to find you, but he specifically ordered that Luffy not be involved. He tends to attract a lot of attention, and the Navy can't be seen showing any leniency to the Straw Hats again. Not after Alabasta.
Sanji shrugged. For a mighty organization, you sure allow your hands to be bound pretty tight. Anyway, the answer's no. I don't go anywhere without my captain or crew, and even if I wanted to, I couldn't take this guy on my own. The world government put a bounty on your head that's higher than most devil fruit pirates, Marion exclaimed. I remember your endless Blackfoot-style training. You must be one of the deadliest men on the Grand Line who can actually swim. Sanji exhaled a plume of smoke. Amongst my friends, sure. We're strong enough to handle most anything. Alone, our strength is diminished. I'm not abandoning them. Besides, I'm a cook, not a mercenary. Tashigi sighed. She took a step forward and playfully twirled Sanji's hair and tickled his chin as she doted upon him with an alluring look.
Please?
For a solid 5 seconds, Sanji's eyes lit up, and he was nearly lifted off the ground by the force of his legs shuddering, but he slapped himself and regained his composure. To my everlasting regret, no. Not even for you, Tashigi. He turned and walked to the bow of the ship and started to remove his jacket and tie. "I'll just swim back." "Sanji!" Marion called out, and he noticed the familiar quiver in her voice that he hadn't heard in years. Suddenly, they were back in Baratier's kitchen. Her eyes were wide and terrified as his hands encircled her throat. "We won't survive without your help. I saved your life," she pleaded. "And I've already saved yours in return," he responded dully without turning around. "That debt has been repaid." "You spared mine." "There's a difference," she replied, her voice cracking. Sanji sighed. As much as he wanted to, he knew he didn't have the fortitude to turn his back on a woman in need, even if it was her. He slowly turned to face her. "Why is he after you and the Black Clover pirates? You have 2 minutes."